Individual Thoughts by Trusted Knower. Episode 001, Standing Up to Wrongheaded Authority, Part 2.
Prepare for running speed!
Sir, there's another starship coming in. It's the Enterprise.
Well, everybody, welcome back to part 2 of Individual Thoughts by Trusted Knower, produced by Kevin Rollins and Bernard Carmen. It's not said better, Kevin, than I think you said it here, so I'm just going to read for a bit here. This show will include humor, music, business ideas, tech talk, community leadership, stories about the real world, rational conversations, and space for all of our friends to share their individual thoughts. This is Trusted Knower's flagship media project. Our mission? Open dialogue about how to determine what is good and true. Episode 1 is dedicated to our friend. This one's for Bo. What is a trusted knower? A trusted knower is someone you rely on for reliable information about a particular problem you are solving, whether it be a personal, business, community, or national policy problem. Determining or failing to determine who you should ask for advice can determine the success or failure of your personal goals, your family's financial security, and your business success. Our project is centered around a series of dialogues that promote and practice friendly, rational conversation to explore personal experience, obtainable facts, and testable models of reality. The goal is to create a happier world for all. We jest, will such efforts save the world? No! But it will help individuals navigate through the confusion, deception, contradiction, and hypocrisy ubiquitous in the world. Individual Thoughts references the concept that rather than embracing a social norm of jumping on board one of the collectivist mob's extreme sides of an issue, the individual is able to consider alternative resolutions to the mainstream narrative.
The narrative.
The narrative.
The narrative.
The narrative.
And the only one who can stop the narrative is the Socratic assassin.
Trying to argue that governmental action is not forceful, Senator Harry Reid claimed that income taxes are voluntary. If the government is in the business of forcefully taking money from some people in order to provide welfare benefits to others, how will the people whose money is being taken feel about the government?
Well, I don't accept your phraseology. Our system of government is a voluntary tax system.
Oh, if you don't want to pay your taxes, you don't have to?
Oh, of course you have to pay your taxes, but we have a voluntary system. The fact of the matter is that if when you pay your taxes, see, in many other countries it's not voluntary. For example, in many countries, the government makes sure that your employer takes out every penny. Many countries don't file income tax returns.
We have
Why?
withholding here too, don't we?
Pardon me?
Withholding?
With some programs, yes, but I'm talking about in some countries, European countries as an example, you don't file an income tax return. There is no need to because your employer takes all the money out. That's the difference between a voluntary and an involuntary
But
system. You can't cheat and not pay your taxes.
Right. Can the taxpayer decide not to pay his taxes if he wants?
He can not pay his taxes if he wants.
What will happen?
He's subject to civil and criminal penalties.
They'll put him in jail. They use force against him. In other words, you are forced to pay your taxes. Whether you fill out your form voluntarily or whether it's withheld by your employer, you don't have a choice on whether you can pay taxes that are going to be used for welfare programs. You can't make that choice.
Well, but the reason our system is called a voluntary tax system, we have all kinds of tax, some people call them loopholes, but others would call them incentives for people to do business. And that's why you're not forced to pay certain tax. There are ways, if you decide to buy a home.
You can decide not to pay taxes in the United States?
I mean, I really don't understand what you're trying to get at. What the point of the matter is...
Because you objected to my phraseology. You say that the government isn't forcefully taking money from some people to provide welfare benefits to others. And in fact, that's what it's doing, because all taxation is forceful. It's backed up by physical force. If you don't pay your taxes, the government will intervene with you forcefully. So you don't have a choice. It's not voluntary. You can't decide not to pay and not suffer a consequence. If you don't pay, you'll go to jail.
Well,
So
you don't
you're
go-
forced to pay.
You don't go to jail. Some people go to jail. There are all kinds of civil penalties. If you don't pay your taxes, you pay interest and you pay penalties. The fact of the matter is, our system is a voluntary system.
So, Kevin,
Yes, Bernard.
what are we going to do in part 2 again? Remind me.
That's a hell of a good question. The main part of part 2 is our interview with Michael Strong, a Socratic educator and innovator. And we're going to hear about how he became the Michael Strong that we know and love. And we're going to find out more about what he's doing right now.
We've seen a little bit about what Jan does already with this recent clip, and we of course listened to him a bit. But how do you contrast or compare and contrast the difference between what Michael Strong does with Socratic methods versus Jan?
Michael Strong's perspective is more pedagogical. Jan's perspective is more journalistic, and it's more of like setting a trap for these Congress people to walk themselves into. When I used to work with Jan, we would do extensive preparation, walking back and forth in his apartment building, hours and hours and hours of this, where I would pretend to be the congressman, and I would be a very well-prepared congressman, ready for every one of Jan's attacks. And my goal is to block Jan from walking down the path that he wanted to Socratically, and to prevent him from getting to the meat where he could hit me hard and prevent me from being pushed into a corner. And so a lot of logical tricks. Michael's purpose, again, as I said, it's very pedagogical. The idea being that it's not about prosecuting the student. It's not about making you feel like an idiot, basically, for holding this opinion. It's more about helping you explore what you believe the truth is. And so helping you draw out what's inside of yourself that is your own perspective. And we saw the clip, I think we didn't watch the whole clip of Michael Strong at TEDx UFM, where he's saying that it's your responsibility as a free individual to put your perception of the world into the world so that other people can benefit from that perspective. And so I think in from a teaching perspective, what Michael is trying to show us how to do is how to learn together. Another perspective that I have coming out of the software development community is the idea of pair programming, and that you have two different people at the computer at once, and you're both working on the problem. Maybe you switch roles. One person is typing the commands into the interpreter. The other person is thinking about where you are in the software problem. But the idea is that you're using more than one mind in solving the problem. And I think the Socratic method is getting at this. It's getting at, can you talk to somebody and figure out what each of you believes and what are the most important questions to ask about your perspective. And so you learn from this other person sitting next to you. The person is asking you to verify your positions in your ideas, and therefore your ideas are becoming clearer. And also, by virtue of this practice, you are learning the questions that you ought to ask yourself. So as you go out every day and you have your mind is running with all its weird ideas, as the ideas are coming out, you can say, you can imagine in your mind Michael Strong or Bernard or Kevin or some friend of yours sitting next to you saying, well, that's a very interesting idea. But what about this? What about that? What is the most important part of what you're saying? Is that, how would you distinguish between what you're saying and a different idea, and draw you towards a better understanding of what you think yourself? And so if you can actually do that within your own mind, and you can, if with great practice you can do it really well, you become your own independent self. The ability to self-check and to self-verify your own ideas based upon your own rationalizations. And to me, that is the essence of being a free person.
So essentially, Michael Strong is sort of like more of an educator while Jan Helfeld is more of an executioner.
Or an interrogator. Well, Carl Milson Carl Milson used to joke that Jan should rename his show The Spanish Inquisition.
That's a great idea. Well, why don't we hear what Michael Strong has to say, shall we?
Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm an absolute fan. I have a copy of your book, Habit of Thought, which is one of my biblical texts, basically. And I actually use Michael's work in a project at the community college here to reform the tutoring center. And we trained the tutors to use Socratic method, habit of thought, rather than doing mini lectures for, as though they were a substitute professor in that moment. So that's just a little bit of praise, and I think it's, well deserved. So Michael, let's start with the very beginning. So I believe you're a St. John's College guy, right?
Exactly, very much so.
Annapolis or Santa Fe?
So Santa Fe. So just to give you some sense for how that happened, I actually was in high school when I first had a high school teacher, my junior year of high school, where she just had a class where we read and discussed books. We read Nietzsche and Buber and Plato, and we just talk about ideas. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It's the sort of thing for me where, before, like in those films where it's black and white and then goes to color, I'd always been a good student, but I realized I was bored by people talking at me. So having the opportunity to explore my own ideas with other people, exploring their ideas, was heaven. So I was going to go to St. John's. I was in Colorado, Santa Fe. I love the West. I was going to go to Santa Fe my senior year, but as it turned out, I only had a couple of classes. I was in Aspen, so I skied a lot. I worked. I had a lot of, liquid income. And then I had good test scores. My college counselor said, look, you can get everything at Harvard, you can get at St. John's. So, study Plato, learn Greek, whatever, Newton. So I actually ended up going to Harvard for a year, but there I was bored by having famous people talk at me. To this day, if I go to a conference, I can't stand to sit in the lectures. I come down for lunch and drinks and so forth and skip all the lectures. But I left Harvard after a year and went to St. John's and had 4 years of thinking and talking about ideas. And basically, I loved it so much, I sought the opportunity after St. John's to lead Socratic dialogues with kids starting in public schools and then in private schools and a charter school and, all over the place. Basically, it's one of my greatest joys in life to discuss ideas with people in an open-ended exploratory fashion.
On this very point, I think it's worth, this is sort of jumping forward a little bit to our present. You have a series of YouTube videos with Alana, and she is 6 years old, maybe?
She's about to turn 8. I started when she was 4, but yeah, I've had a series with her from the time she was just before she turned 5, and then this month she turns 8. So basically I've, good 4 years of Socratic dialogues with a young woman.
Well, I think it's a really interesting business proposition and an education proposition, because I don't know precisely what you charge your clients, if you are charging them anything, but the idea that you can have this add-on education, even through the stream, through the internet, and the dialogues, they go 5-10 minutes, and I can tell that you don't push too hard, and I think that's a good judgment, because you're not trying to prosecute her, you're trying to get her to explore her own ideas.
Exactly. So Socrates described himself as a midwife helping to birth the ideas of others. And I would say that's very much my orientation. There's a hard style Socratic, like Paper Chase, where the law school professor kind of beats up and humiliates the law students. I did a little bit of Tai Chi. I'm much more kind of soft style. But still, I would say the ultimate goal is to, I see the core of Socratic as each of us has a responsibility within ourselves and vis-a-vis each other to have a consistent, coherent understanding of reality. It turns out that's very difficult to do. But if you believe X and you believe Y and those don't make sense, what's going on? How can you believe this and that? And so even though I'm very gentle with Alana, she'll still have inconsistent elements. and I'll ask her, we were talking about fantasy stories recently, and she said, well, a fantasy story is made up. And then we got into, and she's thinking of Harry Potter and whatnot. Then we got into Charlotte's Web, which has animals talking. And I asked her if that's a fantasy story, and she was not sure. Because in one sense, of course, it's made up. But on the other hand, the animal, there's no magic or anything other than the fact that the animals talk to each other and have relationships. And so I'm trying to get her to think about different aspects of her own understanding and whether or not they make sense. Is her notion of fantasy story a consistent, coherent concept? And it's very much what Socrates, the character in Plato, did, talking to his interlocutors. Is justice doing right by your friends, or is justice something to do with how society is ordered? Socrates is always trying to get his interlocutors to come up with a consistent, coherent understanding of concepts, ideas, beliefs.
That's great. Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with all the above, and I think that's wonderful. I wanted to ask a question, sort of down the same path of your experience with working with young people. And I don't know all the names of all the schools, and it seems like every couple of years there's another school that you've created, which is amazing. And I know recently there was Co-School in Austin with Cabelli, who unfortunately was lost. And then more recently you have two or three at least of these. I don't know what's the name, Arts and Tech.
Academy of Thought and Industry. So yeah, we've got 4 high school campuses of the Academy of Thought and Industry, and now several more middle schoolers. But in all my schools, a significant strand has been Socratic. And just to talk a little bit more about it, I see it as the essence of autodidacticism. If we can learn how to learn on our own, then we can learn anything. And some of this is very text-based. So in the classroom Socratic, we read texts closely and try to understand them together. And something that I do that is a bit unusual is I have students read much more difficult texts than they would read on their own. So I often say the best part of my own education was that I grew up in northern Minnesota with bad TV reception. So I read a lot and gradually began reading more difficult materials. Most young people today don't read much. If they read, it's very easy material. So one of the ways in which we, on a concrete basis, get great SAT verbal scores is if we're reading and discussing difficult material, Plato, Toni Morrison, Borges, whatever, on a regular basis, and the students are arguing about what the text means. That creates this deep relationship with, prose and ideas, and sometimes even punctuation. Why did the author put the semicolon there? But in addition to the kind of text-based autodidacticism, they're also obtaining this sense of empowerment in that they can think through their own ideas. Normally I'm very opposed to kind of the hierarchy of knowledge where we're trained from the time we're young to submit to the teacher's belief, then submit to the professor's belief, and then, submit to the politician's belief, submit to the minister's belief, whatever. That is the default setting in our society is we don't have our own ideas. Other people tell us what to believe, the media, whatever. Whereas I think in reality, we all become learners and independent agents when we realize, look, we have to figure it out on our own. We can't really trust anybody. Each of us has our own priorities, beliefs, convictions, and our own experiences. And so I see this big autodidactic sort of process, Socratic process, as let's try to make sense of reality as it stands. And it's really hard. And you can't rely on anyone external to yourself to make sense of reality. Ultimately, you've got to do it. And once you accept that you're responsible for making sense of reality on your own, all of a sudden the doors open up and you become a much more empowered learner. Anytime you don't trust, you're not sure, you're confused by what somebody else says, go and learn, figure it out, look at other sources, look for contradictions, judge for yourself, basically.
I think that people, when they're listening to this, should reflect on the fact that Michael, in his discussion about how to teach young people, and we'll play a clip probably of him with young Alana, who's 8 years old, talking about her ideas and showing how she's developing based upon this Socratic discourse, and seeing that, and then reflecting back to these Congress people who have not learned this lesson and that they are unable to think Socratically, to think intellectually, to think rationally, that this is the message that we're teaching, is that if you learn young, if you learn how to do this, you will not be a bonehead in the US Congress where some crazy Puerto Rican guy shows up and says, let me ask you some questions which are very uncomfortable for you. You won't be in that position because you'll have already thought it through and you'll have a good answer. And so this is part of what Trusted Knower is doing.
Good. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good.
Good. What are you reading? I'm well, thank you. Well, what are you reading these days?
Well, I'm reading Robinson Crusoe, and I'm also starting a new series. I think it's called The Heroes of Olympus or something like that.
Excellent. What's happening in Robinson Crusoe right now?
Yeah. So I'm in the part when he first got shipwrecked.
Oh, wow. And you're very cheery about that. Isn't it scary that he's shipwrecked?
Not really. It's kind of interesting.
Why is it interesting?
Because he actually has to fend for himself. He has to, just survive from the things he has.
And you like stories where people have to survive with almost nothing?
I like stories like that. Maybe people are on the verge of maybe dying, but survive in the end.
I see. And so would you say what you like about it is there's kind of some thrill or fear that they're going to die, but if you know they're going to survive, then the exciting part is seeing how they figure out how to survive?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you know that he's going to survive? Maybe he's not going to survive.
I assume that he's going to survive because in every book that has a character, the good character almost always wins.
Okay, so usually you're saying the protagonist survives. So you're assuming that just because of that framing that Robinson Crusoe is going to survive. And then you're enjoying how he figures things out. Can you tell when you read a book if you would like that person?
Yeah.
Would you say that you like most of the people you read about in books, or are there some characters you don't think you would like?
Some characters in a book, like bad guys or something like that, I wouldn't like, but maybe the good guy, well, not especially just like good guys who do the right thing, but also if they're kind and honest and do the right things.
How about in Harry Potter? Are there any characters you don't like in Harry Potter?
Voldemort, because they are basically trying to destroy the whole world.
So anybody who's trying to destroy things or do bad things, then you don't like them. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, yeah, but sometimes in books, maybe the bad guys can turn into good guys, or maybe they just stay bad. But yeah, that's when I hate them.
Can you think of an example of a bad guy turning good in a book?
In Percy Jackson, there was a demigod named Luke who helped Lord Kronos arise, and then Annabeth turned him good.
So when you say she turned him good, was it magic or persuasion, or how did she turn him good?
I think it was persuasion because they used to be basically family, and they became really, really close. So she always tried to persuade him to not be on the dark side or something like that.
So why doesn't somebody in Harry Potter persuade Voldemort not to be on the dark side?
If or did.
Well, why don't they? Do you think they could persuade him not to be on the dark side?
I don't think. Well, from my thinking, I don't think they would be able to.
Why not?
Because he is head on onto whatever he's doing, even if he gets killed.
How can you tell if somebody is persuadable or not, or somebody can be turnable to the good side? How can you figure that out?
Sometimes how I do it is if someone had a really, really, really strong relationship, like maybe just being really, really, really good friends with another one, and they're on the good side or something like that. Like since they're both connected, maybe the person on the good side could still persuade the person on the dark side to come back.
I see. So it's kind of strength of relationship across the good-bad boundary?
Bernard, do you have any questions?
No, I was going to say, I like this guy, Kevin. Where'd you find him?
I don't know. I was on the streets of Arlington, I think. Actually, that's an interesting question. I try to remember back when. I think it was probably through Michael Osterlink and John Mackey.
Yeah. Michael Osterlink connected me to a whole bunch of people. So I was working with John Mackey, founder and CEO of Whole Foods. And some of this, I would say, gets into a very independent political perspective. So we realize that both the mainstream left, the mainstream right, and both parties are completely inadequate. And part of this is consistency. If you start to think, do I care about agency? And both sides, mess arbitrarily with agency. I see them as very tribal. And even the libertarians. So Mackie and I both identify as libertarians, but we both come from the left and are still kind of do-gooders, want to make the world a better place. And there's a certain flavor of libertarian that can be kind of, hard ass. We don't care about anybody else. That's okay, but can we care about people? And so by necessity, we sort of crafted our own territory. And Australink, and I would say you and other people in this network are kind of independently minded libertarians, where, there's no kind of dogma. And, ideally, we're all working together to come up with ideas that make sense rather than following political tribalisms.
Your project, I believe that project is called Conscious Capitalism. That was the name of the book.
Yeah. So the original version was Freedom Lights Our World, and Conscious Capitalism is the largest spin-off of that. My book coming out of that project was Be the Solution: How Entrepreneurs and Conscious Capitalists Can Solve All the World's Problems, which is very ambitious. But part of our orientation is many libertarians are against taxes and regulations. Instead of being negative, we wanted to be positive. And so the whole reason why taxes and regulations can be a problem is if they inhibit entrepreneurship, and in particular, entrepreneurial solutions. So, my wife is from Senegal. The problem with Africa is it's way over-regulated. It's really hard to do business there. And so we could complain about the regulation, but instead we say, look, we want Africa, we want 1 billion Black people to be prosperous co-creators of prosperity. Oh, and by the way, this insane regulation is in the way. But let's focus people on the incredible upside. In education, I think the government schools are a nightmare. But instead of spending so much time just on the nightmare portion, I create schools where children, young people love learning. They're socially, emotionally well. They become independent thinkers. Many of them are kind of entrepreneurial. So again, instead of spending all the time just on this sucks part, let's get people inspired by, hey, let's create positive solutions. Michelangelo, criticized by creating, is one of my slogans.
I love it. Jim?
No, I don't have any questions.
Bernard?
I'm loving everything. I just want to be quiet and listen more.
So Michael, what do you think that people in this bizarre, weird moment that we live in, what would you say? What advice would you give to the American people in this situation that we're in?
Well, again, I think above all, the political tribalism. So it's useful to realize that politicians themselves have every incentive. Frank Zappa once described politics as the entertainment division of the military-industrial complex. And so, both sides have this incentive to kind of get us frothing at the mouth like rabid dogs in this hate mode. In addition to the politicians, then the media, you sell more with, kind of hate notions. Fundraisers. I once read that a leftist NGO that threw the Kochs under the bus in their fundraising letters would raise 3 times as much than if they didn't throw Kochs under the bus. And so you've got all these incentives for hatred everywhere. And meanwhile, it makes people miserable, and so for me, it's common sense. My social network and the people I talk to are mostly broadly construed entrepreneurial. Some of them are kind of intellectuals carving their own path. Some are social entrepreneurs. Some of them are nonprofits. So for me, entrepreneurial is a big tent that's not exclusive to narrowly profit-making entrepreneurial enterprises. But most of the people I know are doing something. They're taking action. And even with all the noise and insanity out there, and it is absolutely insane, if I wanted to get depressed every night, I could watch the news and, be angry at whatever all the time. And so it's a shit show out there. But meanwhile, I'm creating schools. My wife is creating businesses in Africa. There's a woman I'm helping who's has a doula business, and she's helping reduce premature African-American birth weights. I've got people who are, doing new media projects, people doing research on things. I know a woman who has a COVID, a privacy-preserving COVID tracking app. There's this, I see it as a whole orientation that once one realizes, that for the most part, politics and media are out to destroy your life. obviously sometimes we need to pay attention if it's useful, but I do a very much cost-benefit calculation. Is it worth my time to focus on this particular political situation or not? And if it's not, I've got better things to do than let them get me frothing at the mouth, So I encourage people to be very judicious in terms of when and where and how they focus on the political shit show versus, wow, let's cultivate networks. I mean, blockchain and Bitcoin has been extraordinary. I like to talk about underthrowing government. So one way to think about underthrowing government is, look, the post office is the world's largest civilian vehicle fleet. They, probably kill more trees than anybody. All they do is shuffle around junk mail, and yet, they're still sitting around. But we've got, email, UPS, FedEx, now Amazon. We've got a million ways to communicate. Cheap cell phones. So the post office is basically irrelevant. So in some ways, my vision of government is gradually, with school, I want to have free, low-cost education for all. Bitcoin, blockchain, let's make the whole Federal Reserve irrelevant. Gradually, I see government being like the Queen of England, expensive. Some people wave and pay attention, but it's mostly irrelevant. All the real activity starts to take place underneath it. And yeah, there'll still be people that go to the post office, poor suckers, but most of the activity takes place somewhere else.
The school creation, can you elaborate on what you understand about that?
Well, his most recent school is called the Academy of Thought and Industry, but he's created a number of schools, and he's kind of a school innovator. And I think that's one of the things that people should think about, is the fact that people can create their own schools. And even though, we're sort of beholden to the public school bureaucracy, and it may make a lot of economic sense for a person to just send their kids to the public school, there are add-ons, right? You can find tutors, you can find people like Michael Strong on the internet, and I don't know if he's offering his services freely in general in terms of being open for new clients, but the idea is that there are incredible educational opportunities available, and that you don't really have to be beholden to what's given by your local school district. And I think the more that we create schooling opportunities, and the more that we practice Socratic method and rational discourse here on Trusted Knower, people can understand that it's freely available. Like anybody with a couple of good friends can create their own school, basically. We are a school. We are helping each other be better at what we're trying to do. We try to have rational base. What does rational base mean? What is a rational discussion? It means that you're basing your discussions on what is known and what is knowable, what is fact-based. So you can't just say, well, based on my opinion, we have to do this. You have to justify why you think that's correct, and to be reasonable about your estimates of things. You can't say, well, Bernard, you should just put all your time in this project right now and give up everything else you're doing, give up your day job, because we're going to make $1 million a year. If I were to tell you that, you'd say you're full of shit, Kevin. You're totally full of shit. And of course you'd be right. And that there's no basis for me to say you'd make $1 million a year at this.
Wait. We're not making $1 million a year, Kevin?
I'm sorry to break it to you, Bernard. The idea that if you're going to make an estimate of something, it should be based upon some factual information. Either you at least have a couple of deals in the works. At least you've had a couple of months experience where you can measure based on a certain number of users, a certain number of viewers, a certain number of customers. You can estimate if you got twice or three times that many, then you would have a certain revenue. That's a rational estimate, not a willy-nilly, well, I just feel that what we're doing is so great that we're going to make $10 million. And you say, 10 million, why not 20 million? Like, oh, that's even better. Yes, let's say 20 million. But that is commonly how people talk about things. And you see people playing the lottery, and if you watch the government.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds a lot.
How amazing the government programs are going to be. Well, don't worry about how much it costs. It's going to save. We're going to spend $100 million on it, but it's going to save us $70 million. Oh wow, that's a great deal.
I was going to say, Kevin, what you're saying sounded a lot like government talk to me.
Well, I do live in the D.C. area, so it rubs off.
Hi, this is Kevin Rollins. Our project at Trusted Knower is to have rational conversations about critical issues, to help our listeners and participants to better evaluate what is true and who is trustworthy, to find out what is known and what is knowable. We will keep making episodes. With your help, we can do more. So please consider making a donation at Patreon, www.patreon.com/trustedknower. Every donation helps. $5 helps. Our recommended donation is $17, which we call the price of everything. Those contributing at least $17 will be invited to participate in our community, which will be online soon. If you are interested in sponsoring Trusted Knower, please email us at support@trustedknower.com.
How much do you pay your interns?
Well, it depends on the program that they're part of.
But how much do they get paid? What is their hourly rate? Is it below minimum wage?
It isn't an hourly rate. It's a stipend for a period of time that they come in.
But calculated.
But they do fine by different categories have different. And we can only have a limited number of interns because we don't have the space.
Didn't you say that all services were worth at least $5.15, and here there is a service that's being rendered to you personally, which you are not compensating at all?
No, I said to you earlier, unless someone decides that they want to volunteer. And you cannot underestimate the volunteer effort.
If somebody wants to volunteer to work for McDonald's at $4 an hour, is that all right?
No,
or is that illegal? Is that illegal? You would prosecute that person, right?
No, I wouldn't prosecute them, but I don't think people don't go to work for McDonald's for nothing. They go there because they need to make a living. But if somebody wanted to make the decision that they were willing to work for McDonald's at $4 an hour, it was in their best interest, that would be illegal, would it not? No, it's not a question of being illegal.
Would it be illegal
I don't think that McDonald's would want them there. They would be responsible for them. When somebody comes in here to volunteer in our office, we are responsible for them. We must supervise them, we must train them, we must educate them. It is a responsibility that we have.
If McDonald's had a program, but if McDonald's had a program where they had, in order to be a McDonald's employee, you had to be an intern and work without pay for a month, would that be illegal? Any employer that's hiring minimum wage earners, if they had a program where everybody that had to work for a whole month for free as an intern first, before they hired them, would that be illegal?
Yes, in my view it would be. I think they should pay them as they train them.
In your case, you can hire people for free as interns. It's not illegal. What's the difference?
Well,
is it that you're a congresswoman and that they are private enterprise?
No, but if you talk about any organizations where people want to make a contribution, whether it's to their country or to their church or whether it's to their community, and they have the right to do that.
Or to their private enterprise, like McDonald's or Burger King or whatever, right?
Well, I think it's an absolutely silly example.
Well,
if I may be so bold,
I
think it's silly. I think it's silly. I don't. It's a waste of time.
Let's see what's
you're
silly.
saying.
Did anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
You talked about you're out there doing all these awesome things, and they are awesome, going out and creating schools. What advice would you give to, the family down the street? If they want to have a better education, can they go build it, or do they need some help?
So this is where the number one thing to remember is, I'm a big fan of Ivan Illich, actually, who's known as being on the left, but Illich really made the point that all of these institutions try to create dependency. They want us to be dependent on them. They want us to believe that we need them. The fact is, for most people, most of the time, you have to find a way to structure your child's attention. I would say if your child is focused on something useful, I don't care what they're reading, what logic puzzles they're doing, what math they're doing, what educational videos you're doing. You don't want them just playing video games all day. But as long as they're focused on something positive, I actually think most of schooling is the situation where kids are forced to do crap they don't want to do. They forget almost everything that happens. As long as I have an essay out there on how to give your child an expensive private education for $3,000 a year. And basically what I recommend is that, get them to be readers, through Socratic dialogue, get them to explore ideas, gradually get them to be writers. Math requires disciplines, maybe half an hour and an hour of math every day in a disciplined fashion. And then beyond that, get some tutors and interesting people, and you can share that with other people. So I was kind of doing pandemics and micro schools, well before the pandemic pod thing. But basically, there's so many educated people, there's so many great resources. A lot of the most educated people in history just say, at this age, I read all the books in my father's library. If your kid is a reader, school's a waste of time. My children at one point, I was creating secondary schools and they were still in elementary, and they were in the allegedly best public school in Broward County. But I looked at what they were doing and it was insane. So they came home. My son read, he was in third grade, he read Cartoon History of the Universe by Larry Gonick in 3 days. And he learned more through the Cartoon History of the Universe than he would in his third grade history textbook. You look at it, it's boring and stupid. So I want to empower parents to look at what they can do in, the pandemic pods micro school movement is fantastic. I want everybody, read my article, how to, give your child an expensive private education for $3,000 a year. Go out and look at all the resources. Carrie McDonald is producing great content. Go out and learn about these options and take it into your own hands. Hire tutors, partner with families. Good tutor can be $30 an hour. 10 families each share that. $3 an hour for a 10-to-1 ratio for your kid. And when you start thinking of the school is mostly bullshit, and you can just go out there and start doing it on your own, why wait? So I actually hope this COVID, an outcome is that we see a significantly higher percentage of people, one way or another, DIY education, alone or in groups.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you. That's been all fantastic, and we certainly were going to link to your paper. Is that freely
Thank you.
available?
Been delighted to be here. I'm happy to come back on.
All right.
Well, sir, we'll see you soon.
Nice to meet you, Mike.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Take
Cheers.
care. Bye-bye.
Take a little trip, take a little trip, take a little trip and see. Take a little trip, take a little trip, take a little trip with me.
Well, I guess that's a wrap, folks. So I want to thank once again my friend Jim here, who has been a stabilizing element for all of us.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank our executive producer, Bernard Carmen, for being the amazing, funny character that he is. And I'd like to thank our guests, Jan Helfeld and Michael Strong.